Hello, everyone, and welcome to another iteration of our third Thursday webinar series. This one in joint partnership with the Human Trafficking Prevention Project. My name is Heather Hyman, and I am a staff attorney here at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, where I manage our partnership with the HTPP. And we are very excited to welcome you here today, here with my colleague, Jessica Emerson, the director of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project. And then we are also very excited to have our guest presenter here today, Charlie Borg. Um, Charlie, I'm going to do a quick introduction. Charlie is a deputy director at Framework. We are so excited to have a representative from this organization here joining us today. Charlie specializes in helping providers enhance their skills in working with labor trafficking through a tailored training and support. She develops targeted training and support rooted in her personal experience as a survivor of human trafficking, her background in crisis and trauma psychology, and over 10 years expertise in direct services. Previously, she's worked with USCRI, Homeland Security, the National Human Trafficking Technical Assistance Center, and the International Organization for Migration. So we're so lucky here in Maryland to have Charlie joining us and talking to us about what's really, I think, an under-discussed issue. If anyone's joining us from outside of Maryland, you may not know, but Maryland was sadly a bit behind the curve in catching up on discussions of and having laws against labor trafficking. And we're, of course, in the advocacy community trying to change that and also trying to look at the many ways in which people that are labor trafficked are impacted by other laws, particularly if they're ending up in situations where they're basically forced to engage in criminal behavior as a part of their trafficking experience. So we're very excited to be diving into this discussion today. Before I hand it over to co-presenters and to our guest presenter today, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. It will be up on our MVLS HTPP resource library. Usually in a couple weeks, we get it up there so you can view it again, or if you have to leave early, you can still have access to this resource, and we'll give you those websites at the end of the presentation. We'll also be emailing out a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides to you, so you don't have to worry about too frantically taking notes. Just sit back, absorb the information. We also have enabled the chat function. I think we have a little bit smaller group today, so please feel free. We'll be monitoring the chat to have comments. I know Charlie's going to ask some questions to get us kicked off as a community and talking today. But we ask that people use the chat and not the Q&A function as we're moving forward. So thank you so much for being here, Charlie. And Jess, I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Yes. So again, welcome, Charlie. Your bio clearly shows that you have no knowledge in this field, no history, and we're going to learn nothing today.
Nothing.
And I'm really excited to have Charlie working with us again. Charlie used to be in the DC area and working with me a lot more, so I am very happy to have her back with us. And again, just want to echo Heather's comments about being thrilled to bring this presentation to the realm of what we're doing here at the HTPP. And, this really represents, again, just just kind of where this work is going. When we started issues of forced criminality back in 2010, 2011, we were only talking about sex trafficking, and we were only talking about being forced into sex work, right? And so we were only talking about crimes involving prostitution. And then we evolved to understand that that was not the only crime that sex trafficking survivors were forced to commit. And then we were learning that sex trafficking survivors were not the only victims of trafficking who were forced into forms of criminality. And then I think that we were looking at labor trafficking in not quite the right way. And we were kind of looking at it thinking that it was going to be more the way that, sex trafficking survivors are criminalized. And, the lens of forced criminality has come out of and has evolved out of that. And so we are thrilled to kind of update our thinking and our thought processes. And Heather and I have talked with our team about how we are not doing a great job. And we know we are seeing this like that. That's, I think, the thing that I want to make sure and I know Charlie's going to do a who's on the call kind of a, what type of service providers are on the call. But I want to stress that, when you're working with survivors of trafficking, that means you're working with survivors of forced criminality who are labor trafficking survivors. So it's just, and we know we are too. And it's just that we're not being purposeful enough in trying to identify these folks. So this is really helpful for us as we make our work better. So Charlie, thank you for this. And we look forward to learning from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And happy spring, everyone.
Happy spring. And my impression is that I'm not shooting for the hour, correct? I have like an hour.
We have until 1:30. If we wrap up earlier, that's fine, but we have until 1:30. And a lot of times folks do have to drop off at 1, which is fine, but we record the webinar so folks can pop back on when it's posted on the website and view the rest of the presentation. So the time is yours.
Perfect. Well, I'm so glad to be here. I used to work in Maryland, used to live in Maryland, love DC, used to live in DC, work in DC as well. Used to work in Virginia and live in Virginia. Well, I guess I've collected them all. But really, really happy to be on this call. Love collaborating with Jess and MBLS any opportunity that I have. And I'm glad that we're all talking about this topic that is really important. So I'm with Framework. We are a OVC technical assistance provider dedicated to engaging and tailoring resources for all of you to use when we connect one-on-one, when you are delivering services in your community, and when you are connected to clients as survivors, as with survivors as clients, as employees, and as consultants. So happy to be here, happy to represent Framework. And if you find your way to frameworkta.org, you can find our resource libraries. We have two, one with general resources, the second with resources all created by survivors.
And can we just give a shout out to that? Our team just completed one of the two, pretty hefty trainings. It takes several hours. Not the delivery of services, but kind of the 101 kind of framing the issue. We did it as a team, and I'll admit I thought a lot of it was going to be kind of redundant for someone who's been in the anti-trafficking field for 20 years. And it was, some of it I knew, but it was fuel for discussions, foundations to combat trafficking, e-learning. It was wonderful. We loved it. So we're just gonna
Thank you. It was an incredible labor of love. Took us 2 years to make it in total. But yeah, 7 modules, very, very interactive. You will have a simulated co-learner who will ask questions. You will have case studies. You will practice your skills. You'll hear stories. You'll think about things as far as in the kind of routine way that we talk about trafficking, and in the whole systemic way that we don't always think about things. Today, we're going to talk about forced criminality and the trends. We're going to talk about challenges and opportunities, as well as response and connection. So I want to know from you, grab your phone, scan that QR code, or go to slido.com with the keyword of, can she type and talk at the same time, with the keyword of MVLS. So slido.com, MVLS, or just scan the QR code. And I want to know how long you've worked with labor trafficking survivors. And how many people do we have on the call?
So it's 22 minus us,
All right.
whatever that is.
19-ish folks. We've got 7 people who've activated their poll so far. We'll give you a little bit more time. And it looks like we've got a mixture of folks. All right, we're up to 11.
Come on, everybody. You can do this. 6 or 7 more people have to do this.
I know it's lunchtime. Gotta put down the fork for a second.
We can call you out.
The pressure's on. All right. Do 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 do. All right. As a thank you, we got a couple more people. And just so you know, on your phone or tab, it will change the question as you go. So every time I ask a new question, it'll pop up automatically for you on the screen that you're on. So you don't have to do anything else. You've done it. You're done. All right. How long have you worked with labor trafficking survivors? Most of you are feeling fresh. Exciting, amazing place to be. I'm even more proud of you for being here today. And we've got a mixture of the rest of them, all at 20%, equally spaced, with less than 2 years, 3 to 5, and over 5 years. So thank you all for being here. Hopefully that's something that all of you can learn, but also in the chat, if you're in that over 2 years, over 5 years, feel to share your expertise too. We can all learn from each other. So tell me about your role with clients. And one of the things I'm curious about is how many of you are interacting with clients versus being in more supporting, maybe researcher roles, etc. Just helps me with some of my examples. Though if we had a call with just all researchers thinking about how to consider and understand the prevalence of forced criminality, that'd be really fun, honestly. All right, we've got attorneys, program coordinators, direct service advocates and case managers, forensic interviewers, local government prevention manager, working directly with survivors, researcher, more focused on human trafficking data.
Amelia. I'm sorry.
Yes, anonymous survey.
Like, I'm looking at some of the people who are there and I'm like, I don't see the people's descriptions.
Is it, do I know Amelia? I can't see any of the Amelia R.
Yeah.
If it is, then hi Amelia.
You know Amelia. Everybody knows Amelia.
All right, we're at 11 people.
She's so well known.
Let me
She's
grab
no longer anonymous.
Chat. Oh, hi. Oh, hi. All right. Prevention manager, human trafficking specialist. Fantastic. Thank you. It sounds like vast majority of you have direct connection with clients on a regular basis. And 40% of you are looking to have that first labor trafficking interaction. So let's jump in it. Let's think about it. One thing that I want to just kind of preface with is that one form of trafficking should not be considered more severe or in need of services than another. The status of legislation that ignores the equally urgent needs of child labor trafficking survivors endorses cruelty and child abuse and wholly disregards the egregious torture of children. So that's a quote from Sabra Boyd. That there's also survivor comments on the hierarchy of trafficking experiences, people feeling like their victimization history didn't matter, even though a third of all trafficking survivors, labor trafficking survivors, male and female, identify as having experienced things like sexual violence. A third identifies having experienced physical violence. So these people are undergoing very strenuous circumstances, isolation, being put down through a variety of ways, as well as physical, sexual abuse, etc. So it's important to think about how we might be focusing on one versus the other and try and call ourselves forward in that.
Well,
So,
I can give a very quick example in Maryland. So
yeah.
we finally, and you know, I know Amelia's on the call, and I know we recently, or 2020 or 2021, passed Safe Harbor, which was great. But then we realized that the labor trafficking of children was not defined as child abuse. Therefore, any identification of a labor trafficked child would not be eligible, would not make the child eligible for services under the Safe Harbor bill. You know, I didn't explain that very well, but yeah, we just didn't even consider it.
Well, and
And that was
Maryland
like last
recently
year.
recently escalated child labor trafficking to child abuse for mandated reporter requirements.
Yeah, that's what we did last year.
Yep. Which is a perfect example of the hierarchy that we're talking about. Children experiencing labor trafficking are at incredible risk for malnourishment, for lack of education, for abuse, for sexual assault, etc. And should be seen, should be connected to services. But I'm very glad that Maryland is aware of that misstep and has moved forward. And I was very happy to work with you all and framework supported in the development of the curriculum for the mandated reporters. All right, so this you've probably all already seen multiple times, all the time, but just throwing it up there, they do differentiate, though the way that we like to think of it as at Framework is that human trafficking considers all labor, and that we've just, for some reason, singled out sex work. So we like to put it back into one group. We really think that that is advantageous when you're thinking of criminal prosecuting and when you're thinking of identifying co-occurring client experiences. All right, so forced criminality is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to commit a crime. And that crime can be anything. Anything from human smuggling to identity theft, regular theft. We'll go over a couple more examples as well. So some of the trends that we see are a large intersection between sex trafficking and forced criminality. So if you are working with sex trafficking survivors, you are very, very, very likely, like 95% of the time, going to be working with forced criminality survivors. This in part relates to just the opportunistic nature of human traffickers, that they're looking for people to solicit other people online. They're looking for people to recruit. They're looking for people to sell drugs. They're looking for people to deliver stolen goods. They're looking for people to steal from the Johns, etc. Those are all examples of forced criminality. And one current unfortunate misstep is the trial with Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy. If you look into the cases, there is a conversation. There's accusations of sex trafficking. There's a conversation of forced labor, even though it's not called labor trafficking. Just a discussion of these people were not only required to perform sex acts or engage in these environments, but they were also required to work administratively around the clock, 24/7, weeks, months on end, doing whatever it was that he wanted. And there's a very good chance, since I don't think that P. Diddy was coordinating meetings or renting rooms or things like that, there's a very, very good chance that forced criminality was also a part of this case, and labor trafficking, forced criminality, not discussed at all. So keep tabs on that case, read just the regular news articles, and after this training, you'll be able to be like, oh, this is labor trafficking, this is forced criminality, and they're not naming it, and that's doing our survivors a disservice.
And I think there's, we've said this a million times in other trainings, and when I say this, I'm not trying to reduce the violence and the horror of sex trafficking. I'm not trying to do that, but it's a lot of times it's not sexy enough, and it's not as salacious enough. And so I don't think that TMZ is going to care as much about forced labor as they are about sex trafficking. You know what I mean?
Unless we all care.
Unless we all care. Yeah.
Yep.
And I know there were also allegations of running drugs all the time for him.
Yep. Yep, exactly. So forced criminality often co-occurs with other types of labor trafficking and other types of abuses. One of my biggest missteps in my career, I retroactively realized that I have misidentified or missed identification opportunities with past clients when I was a therapist, case manager, crisis responder, etc. One example is that I was working with a domestic violence survivor. She was I don't know, middle-aged white woman, very granola, very hippie. I was living in Colorado at the time. And she was seeing me for trauma therapy from after this domestic violence experience. And she had a lot of difficulty because she had criminal charges from growing and selling marijuana illegally, which it is legal in Colorado to grow and to sell. But she was told that they had a license, they didn't. She didn't want to work in that area. She wanted to sell nutritional things. She was very into
crunchy
nutrition.
Things.
She wanted to sell crunchy things.
Wanted to sell crunchy things.
Like 3 years later, I called my old organization and I was like, hey, can I talk to the clinical director? I was like, I had this case. This was the person's first name, and they, I'm positive, experienced labor trafficking, but also forced criminality. And I did not identify that as I was their therapist. So I called and let them know, because of the fact that, you know, there could be opportunity with her criminal record that was very negatively impacting her moving to her own place, her, you know, like starting her business endeavors, etc. So maybe you all will see this moving forward. Maybe you all might be able to see this retroactively. There's also comorbidity with child abuse, sexual violence, gang violence. Moving getting rid of the chat box again. All right. We know that 83% of individuals face arrest before the age of 22, 67% of folks that experienced forced criminality experienced periods of unsheltered homelessness. Excuse me. 56% were under the age of 18 during the forced criminality trafficking experience. And 47% were identified as a parenting youth.
And by parenting youth, do you mean with their own biological children?
Yeah.
Or they were, oh, okay, or they were taking care of
siblings? Actually, I'm not positive in the variation of that.
I know a lot of kids who are parenting, but not their biological children.
I'll try and find the actual answer of that too. However, I will say that the sources for this presentation are largely gone. So you can use the retroactive, what's that called, Jess?
The Wayback Machine.
You can use the Wayback Machine, but otherwise, yeah, a lot of these resources are hard to find now. All right, so have you worked with survivors of forced criminality? I realize that 40% of you said that you haven't worked with labor trafficking survivors, but maybe that's changed now that you have heard a little bit about these experiences. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, 4 people already say yes.
Charlie, I was struck when you were, and thanks for being so transparent, like kind of talking about like a misstep and missing an identification, right? And trying to go back and address that. I feel like Jess and I and we as a wider community are kind of involved in steps like that a lot, because sometimes it is like it's almost like the mundanity of some of the things that people are forced to do that then get them placed into a space of being viewed as a perpetrator of a crime, as opposed to being able to still hold space and be recognized as being victimized, that we really struggle with. And that it's not just advocates, but it's kind of all through someone's chain of experience, whether it's with law enforcement, government agencies, like how can we intervene to be sure we're looking at that full picture. So, and I think there's no, we all need to be humble enough and open to revising our view and thinking back, like, did we miss things? How can we not miss things going forward? To be sure, like you said, we're accessing all the remedies available to people, if they find themselves, if they've been in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And wow, I am so impressed because 71% of you say that you have worked with survivors of forced criminality. All right. And because we know that there's high crossover with forced criminality and where we think of sex trafficking, we do see disproportionate connection with women and girls. I think that is in large part related to identification and outreach, etc. I don't think that it would be so disproportionate if we really clearly saw everyone. But we do know that once we move into labor trafficking and forced criminality, that we see a larger instance of like 50-50. Okay, so most people have only worked with adults. So working with male identified adults, 25% of you have worked with men and boys. 11% of you have worked with boys.
But again, I'm thinking back to when I was a social worker, my trafficking work was with adolescent girls, and the work that I did at the Harvey Milk High School's after school program, that was, I missed everything. I know. Because I
Yeah,
was looking for, I mean, this is also back in the aughts. So, I got to give myself a little bit of grace on that. Um, but yeah, I know this was happening, and I missed, because I was looking for traditional sex and labor trafficking.
yeah. I mean, and where
I
we
know I missed all this.
stand is based on where we sit. What we see is based on what we're expecting to see. So it makes a lot of sense. And there are a lot of opportunities, though. As uh, as late, but as early as 2017, I started working with a detention center in Virginia that that brought me in because they're like, every single one of our kids that is here has um is in this situation out of need, and a large percentage of them were coerced or forced to sell drugs, to deliver things, to participate in gang violence. And they're like, what do we do with this? What do we do with all these kids that are here because of forced criminality and labor trafficking? Also, that detention center, I tried to connect them a variety of times with like larger organizations that had the capacity to work with them for like the time span that they needed. No one ever has. So that was a decade ago. And no one has ever taken the time to go through all of their screening processes, their check-ins, et cetera, to deliver training to their staff. Even though I've asked multiple organizations to do it.
For anyone out there looking for grant money,
Yep.
just saying, for
Yep.
minors. So, Charlie, I have a very large philosophical question about that, but I think I want to wait till we watch all this and then ask it.
Bring it.
I have no, because this is going to be about prison labor and children forced into gangs. I'm going to wait until we finish this and then ask.
All right, bring it later.
Yeah, all the men, once the men and boys material is done, then I'll ask you.
All right, and this is a clip from our Honoring Black Voices in the Anti-Trafficking Movement, a resource that we had to take down because we can't have things related to Black History Month. So here's the clip. I'm not jaded at all.
Highlight is that, internationally, when we look at the Palermo Protocol and how human trafficking is looked at more broadly, there's another element of labor trafficking that oftentimes gets brought up, and that's usually in the context of forced criminality or child soldiers. Oftentimes we refer to them, right? And a lot of people in America oftentimes think about, oh, kids who are kidnapped and forced into, armies in Africa. But the reality is, we have child soldiers here in America. We have kids who were recruited into gangs, street gangs, where we're talking about 10, 11, 12-year-old children, where their gang leaders are 25, 26, 27-year-old men, right? But they are not identified. And this, in my mind, this is one of the biggest failures of the anti-trafficking movement and the anti-trafficking community over the last 20 years, is the failure to adequately identify children who are exploited in gangs and forced into criminality as victims of human trafficking. And there's a much larger conversation, but to Evelyn's point, right, that is wrapped up in race, that is wrapped up in nationality. You know, in the 1990s, there was this whole effort to label mostly Black children as quote unquote super predators, right? And when we did that, we removed the spectrum of their own victimization and the recognition of a lot of kids in the inner city who are exploited in these situations as victims of actual human trafficking and our own version of child soldiers. And so I just wanted to, I thought Evelyn's point was a great one.
All right, so that's from James Dold, who is a survivor of forced criminality through domestic servitude, and is very passionate also about forced criminality in the United States. All right, so as far as Polaris data that we have, individuals that have experienced criminalization, 28%, that was before they were exploited, 81% while they were exploited, and 42% after they were exploited. We also have some data that out of arrests that happened, 81% were arrested during their exploitation, and 54% were arrests related to the exploitation, which I interpret as related to forced criminality. Another thing that we have from the Urban Institute's I can't remember the name of the it's like a 120-page document. I'll make sure that all of you get the link. But one thing that we know from that is that out of individuals that connected to law enforcement while they were to report that they were being trafficked, they were just as likely to be arrested as they were to find help from law enforcement.
It's the perceptions of justice, the multiple survey study, perceptions of justice. I've cited that in grant applications.
And they and this isn't explicitly related to forced criminality, it's all labor trafficking, but if that's the case, if there's a 50% chance in general labor trafficking instances, what do we think the likelihood of people being seen as survivors and not as criminals would be if they did report? All right, so some examples of areas of forced criminality: theft. Think, stories all the way back to Oliver Twist, robbery, identity theft, forgery, weapon stealing, drug trafficking and sales, gang activity. And one of the things I want you to make sure to remember in all of these is that it's not just males, right? It's males and females. Females are in gangs as well. So every single one of these areas, if you have a picture in your mind, make sure that you diversify. Marijuana related crimes, recruitment for sex trafficking, online and phone scams, etc. One case that I consulted on was a group of minors who kept stealing cars. And, I asked more questions, and this, I don't even think was related to their original case consultation request, but they complained about this occurrence of minors running rampant, stealing cars. That's a really specific crime to be seeing across a region so frequently. And I was like, what, is there any information that these individuals are connected? Can you see a web that might be a clue? Is there an individual that holds more power, as far as maybe they have access to weapons, maybe they have access to resources, maybe they're older, maybe they have social power that they can exert, etc. And it did turn out to be a labor trafficking situation. through forced criminality.
There's, especially in Baltimore City, there is always, you know, the Live at 10 scoop on the news, these, you know, rings of adolescents that are going around and stealing cars and doing all of that. And now I'm thinking about that. I mean, usually I just think of, why are we painting children like they're adults, which is its own problem.
And
But
here in our region, I mean, there has been some discussion of this where youth who were engaging in kind of, you're being forced to engage in systematic crimes. When a little bit deeper digging was done,
yeah,
there was a finding of, like you said, someone who was an adult, who had more power, who was engaged. And I think
or perhaps a weapon. Yeah.
we just don't do the digging. We make assumptions, and there's easy labels that are put on by the media and other actors in this.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you raised the notion of especially young Black male youth as super predators. That has stuck. That has stuck forever. And unfortunately, I think it always will. And then just the notions that young Black men are stronger and bigger and less vulnerable to pain. I think that all plays into how people see these groups of young people, kids.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it also plays into our prejudice, our racism,
Yeah.
but also our
It gives validation to our prejudice
call
and our
to help.
racism.
And yep, it gives validation to the negatives while also keeping us further away from the positives, where we are called to serve this population, where we are thinking about them every single time that we're developing outreach materials or collaborating with a partner, and where we're not curious as to why we don't see those kiddos or those men in our programs accessing services.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities. Victims of trafficking should not be held liable for their involvement in unlawful activities that are a direct consequence of their victimization. Trafficked individuals who are forced to commit a crime are commonly mistaken for criminals rather than being identified as victims. U.S. Office to Combat and Monitor Labor Trafficking in Persons a decade ago, but this is still an emerging conversation. So protecting survivors of trafficking, victims and survivors of trafficking should not be inappropriately penalized for unlawful acts they committed as a direct result of being trafficked. This is something that inspired me to call my old organization and see if there was any way that they could connect to that survivor that I worked with and maybe clue them in that they might have access to additional resources. But being able to see these situations as they are being processed or as individuals are being arrested, interviewed, etc., we could impact the lives of survivors so much as far as their perceptions of themselves, as far as their community's perceptions of themselves, and as far as the resources available to them, as well as the mitigation of this kind of scarlet letter of a criminal history when they're seeking employment, housing, etc. So some challenges, obviously trafficker control, other things related that we typically think of when we think of trafficking scenarios. Also absence of protection systems for children. This is still tied into the fact that there's differences in resources for minors who are identified as sex trafficking survivors versus labor trafficking survivors. And forced criminality is still over here, even though it has a high co-occurrence with sex trafficking. Forced criminality is lucrative and low risk enterprise, plus our society norms, our perceptions, our news, our stories, etc., perpetuate a narrative that allows for traffickers to stay under the radar, treating victims as criminals, lack of identification and awareness, lack of clear legal definitions, trafficker manipulation, impunity, fear of authorities for a variety of reasons, and police not believing survivors. So we're going to listen to a survivor from Chicago that was convicted of manslaughter at, I think, either 14 or 16, but was recruited into a gang at either 12 or 14.
Well, so I just want to like really restate something I mentioned earlier. And that is that I was oblivious to the fact that much of what I was experiencing was a form of victimization. Much of what you said earlier today, James, that much of my actions were based upon the most basic and fundamental human needs. And those were the needs for love, a sense of belonging, purpose, and naturally found that amongst my friends, but found this very colorful entity. And what was really, I felt initially, especially, was a wellspring of support. What I felt initially was a source of protection in a very violent community, was a source of protection from a very abusive stepfather who hesitated at nothing and beating us, hitting my mom, and kicking our dog. Was a source of protection from all that I felt was threatening, because I felt that sense of belonging and safety there. And so for me, being unaware of how, in so many ways, while I was seeking the emotional rewards and filling those emotional deficits in my life, while I was going through the day-to-day of those experiences and not being aware of how, having the inclination or the sensations of fear, or even just the feeling as though like, I don't want to do that, but not really having a choice. I thought that came with it. I thought they came with, I thought I was, in some ways, like, this was a part of it.
All right, there on our website, there are other sound bites by Xavier, and I encourage all of you to watch his TED Talk, No Child Born Bad, I believe, which is fantastic. So thinking about response and opportunities, thinking about response to my survivor of domestic violence, to Xavier, to the other kiddos that we see. So recognizing and responding. So having the confidence, having the curiosity, keeping those antennas out when you're with your clients, but also being brave and comfortable with the fact that we might ask clunky questions. This is very similar to the way that you're asking questions about other types of trafficking, but a first time is nerve-wracking. And also seeing the opportunities with partners and retroactively, you can connect to past survivors, you can connect to past organizations that you've worked with. Improve legal and administrative shortcomings. I was very upset last year when I was at a conference and someone said that like district attorney or something said that they thought that the difference between sex trafficking and labor trafficking were largely just that we don't have the pathways, we don't have the legal structures. And I was like, is that we're not making them? Is that we're not doing those things? It's that they're not there, and they will continue to not be there unless we prioritize. You cannot blame past inaction on current inability. ensuring relevant outreach, making sure that things make sense, that your resources feel safe, that if there are photos that they represent various individuals. If you're trying to target forced criminality survivors in an area, making sure that you have those examples, increasing awareness of expungement, improving job and housing for those with criminal histories. But one example of that is that it's really important for framework to elevate voices of a variety of survivors. And so we have worked with our internal HR process so that we can move through individuals with criminal histories, individuals that have been convicted of child sex trafficking, individuals that have been convicted of manslaughter, etc.
You know, Charlie, just to go back, I'm sorry, I was really struck by what you said that was it a prosecutor that said that to you?
I think it was a district attorney.
A district attorney. Yeah, it's just interesting to me also who we're willing to just accept that for.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, that just was marinating in my brain. Like maybe if it was a sex trafficking survivor, we wouldn't have accepted that.
Yep, exactly. Or we take charge. We'd be like, there's a gap.
There's a gap. We got to do something about it. Yeah.
Yep.
And then also for the outreach and training and collaborating, just want to push again that part 2 of the learning modules on Framework site is about improving your outreach to labor trafficking survivors. So
yep, that's
sorry,
true.
got to put that out there.
Although one thing that I'm also thinking of with forced criminality is I always say that you should have something that motivates when you're designing your outreach, and talking about possibilities with criminal histories, talking about not being connected with the police. A lot of the normal things that might motivate someone to call, but also things that might motivate males to call, which might be more related to things like other economic opportunities. That's relevant to all survivors, but just saying, we in the sex trafficking field have a lot of motivation for support for being able to talk to somebody, being able to access housing. And a lot of labor trafficking survivors really they have an economic need and they need to get going right away. Consider alternative programming. Consider, DC has things like Hope Court for individuals that might be experiencing sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation of children, making sure that labor trafficking and forced criminality are within that. Also, as I worked with Hope Court historically, there was a huge crossover between forced criminality and crimes in general. One of the case studies that we'll watch next is actually specifically from DC. Prepare staff to work with emotional regulation. If individuals have been in criminal realms, there is our cultural norms of things like bravado, anger, being powerful, etc. And also with males, we know that in our culture, that's one of the only emotions that we allow them to safely display. And so making sure that your staff is ready to work with folks who are experiencing anger, which I always thought was one of the best places. There might be a threat involved. Something might be broken, but if an individual is getting angry, we're close. We're like really close to a disclosure. We're really close to emotional breakthrough if we can keep a safe, supportive environment, because otherwise that person's gone and you'll never see them again. And make sure your staff are relatable. So survivor needs housing, language, dependency on employers actually feels like it's supposed to be on the other side, but employment, safe home life, thinking of psychoeducation for families based on cultural norms, because there might be intergenerational trafficking, there might be intergenerational sex trafficking, which then can move into forced criminality. There was a case in New York recently where parents required their two sons to recruit and traffic individuals. Cognitive and physical difference services. This was another thing that I have seen, individuals who might be on the out groups. They might be different in one way or another, potentially at more risk because of social isolation, and be targeted more heavily. Access to safety, access to economic opportunities, love, belonging, community. If you're talking with a 16-year-old and you can offer them food, water, or the cool thing that's going to help them get friends and belong and have social status, they will take the cool thing. They will forego food, forego water, because connection is the most important thing as far as their identity at that point in time. And for a lot of us, for a lot of points in time. Social assumptions and opportunity.
That's for every adolescent, regardless
yes.
of their experiences. That is normal.
Yep, across the board.
Across the board.
And trauma bonds, you know, Xavier talked about how he thought that he found the biggest, best, most protective, most safe group of friends. Additionally, my client in a domestic violence relationship, there were trauma bonds. So,
and I also think I just want to put this out there for a lot of us who, for those of us who tend to work more exclusively with female identified folks, there are correlations to be found with male identified folks and DV and criminal records. It's the reality is, right? But there's also data to show that when folks can get and keep jobs, that the abuse can lessen. When folks can get out of the house and start to feel like they are producing in the world and a part of something, and so I think that, that's something that folks doing this work are going to have to kind of deal with in their own heads, is that some of the folks that we deal with may be perpetrators of interpersonal violence. And you may have to talk about that and think about why, and maybe not jump to conclusions about, someone being a bad person as a whole, and just like you said with Xavier saying, I thought I found the perfect human relationships are complicated, right? And people can do bad things even though, they have good hearts inside, and they're, they can find, have good experiences with the community that he's talking about, and have good memories, and still be forced by that community to do really bad things. And so we have to this is across the board. If we demonize, as service providers as a whole, if we demonize a person's experience, with X community or X person in their lives, and don't accept that there is good and bad, right? And that somebody can love this person or this community, or they can, have good experiences and bad, then you are going to lose your connection with that person. And so I just want to, if you're working with male identified folks, there may be folks who are perpetrating interpersonal violence, and that's the reality.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
female identified folks. I'm
Well-
playing, I'm doing generalities, obviously.
That social perception, I feel like, I mean, that's a theme that we, Charlie, keep returning to and that we keep returning to. And I think that that's something that we just have to continue to have conversations here in Maryland. I think we have, when I still talk generally with people about trafficking, even the perception of like folks that have stable immigration status versus those that don't, the understanding that somebody who is, born here in the United States could be a victim of forced criminality, could be put in that position, I think is very hard for some people to get their heads wrapped around because of the way that this whole issue, whether it's sex and or labor trafficking, is framed in national dialogue, especially right now. So we have to be, we have to be unpacking these assumptions and really, like, again, peeling away the layers, so that we're not pigeonholing people into roles and then letting us not see the complexity of their experience, and getting them all the help that they need to be able to access.
Yep, absolutely. And, when we're talking about that love, about that friendship, about that relationship, it
Those things are
is
real.
unhealthy, but it's real, it's
Yeah.
valid. There's nothing less about it. And it might be the most that they've ever felt protected, the most that they've ever felt loved.
Which says more about the people that came before than it does about the person in the moment.
Yep, exactly. In my own personal experience, when in one of the situations where I was trafficked as a child, I grew up with a mother who had a mental illness and was not able to take care of me, remember me,
Right.
etc. She would be gone for multiple days at a time. So I just kind of wander. Anyway, made a friend, started living with this girl in second grade, and her parents produced and sold cocaine, as well as had a sex trafficking business, not business.
I was gonna say ring.
Yeah, as far as from appearances, had a sex work business in the basement. All of it related to high levels of force, fraud, and coercion. It was all trafficking.
Yeah.
And the older sister was required to participate, to sell drugs, to cut the cocaine,
Drugs,
to she was also sex trafficked. And that environment was there were constant fights, there was constant abuse, there was constant emotional abuse, and that environment was the safest environment that I had seen. I was happy to be there. They had food, they had electricity,
there were humans around.
there were people there. I didn't have to just turn on the radio to listen to the commercials to pretend that someone would save me from the monsters that I thought were everywhere. It was where I wanted to be. It was, yeah.
Right. And so at that time, had someone that, because this is also, you have a frontal lobe now. You didn't have one then.
Yep.
So at that time, had someone demonized the entirety of that family, they would have lost you.
Oh yeah, I was a Spitfire too, which is interesting. As we see with a lot of individuals who experience forced criminality too, because they do, to some extent, they might not have confidence, but they have self-efficacy. They believe in their ability to do things because they have achieved, accomplished, and done a lot. Some oftentimes at the behest of other people, but it builds a certain kind of confidence, and you see willingness to fight for things, to defend, to protect. Plus, you add in those cultural components of strength and ferocity being valued. yeah, you get some really, really aggressive,
Feisty.
cool and interesting and capable and passionate and loving and protective individuals.
Yeah.
All right. So thinking of these criminal records and how it impacts survivors, 69% said that it kept them from getting or keeping a job. 63% getting training, education, or license.
I'm glad
59%
they split those up because it is distinct things.
getting good housing. 35% maintaining custody of their children. So huge life impacts that, as far as we're going quite a ways back, but the non-punishment principle shouldn't be relevant, shouldn't be following people for decades.
Well,
okay, so don't know, I didn't catch what happened with the word recommendations. But be authentic. One of the things that often comes from trauma is the ability to pinpoint people's intentions, to see through masks, etc. Encourage positive male relationships. Have male staff. A lot of our organizations might have not have anyone who's male identified, and also some of our organizations can be guilty of being a little frilly. You know, make sure that the names of your organizations are representative. And that's another problem with our names being so tied to sex trafficking, that labor trafficking survivors and prideful men might not want to be associated with these organizations. Promote healthy coping mechanisms.
Yes, Cheryl, frilly.
less substance, less anger, but use harm reduction models and see through the anger. One of the things that I was very that's weird. I got really uncomfortable with tooting my own horn, but I will say one of the areas that I was successful with in working with individuals that had gang affiliations was to have anger related guided imageries. So we all talk about guided imageries, right? We all have been on a beach and like felt the sand and listened to the waves. I created additional alternative guided imageries to relate to somatic experiences of anger. So the heat that you feel on your skin, the racing of your heart, the tightening of your muscles, and thinking about, one of them was being in a jungle and seeing animals. And one of my clients had a gorilla, this gorilla that related to them, that like beat on their chest and threw things and showed their teeth and saliva spitting off of it. You know, we had these other ways to relate to emotions and then practice healthy coping mechanisms, practice being uncomfortable, triggered, etc., without breaking things, without punching things, which are actions that I've seen with males and females, by the way.
I really like that you put humor in there, because
yes.
I remember in the places that I've been that have been more male dominated spaces. So the after school program at the Harvey Milk High School, at several of the adolescent group facilities, man, I will admit that when I started, I had thin skin. I do not anymore, because I got it just the same as everybody else. And, you know, I didn't think that I had a big forehead, but I got it, you know, and you got to be able to dish it out, and you got to be able to take it. So I really love that, like humor and just being able to bust, you know what, is a thing, and it really does. It is a huge part of connection.
And as
It's
far
a fun part of connection.
as far as thinking of like building rapport with clients, but also healthy active listening things like summarizing statements, reflective statements, naming, you can use humor in those moments to kind of break a little bit of the seriousness and tension. And a good example is when we started, Jess was like, "Oh, you don't have any experience at all." And
I do that
with,
all the
with a
time.
client, I might rather than I'm not recommending this for all clients at all, but one example is that with a client, rather than being like, that sounds like there might be some avoidance. That doesn't sound like avoidance at all. You know, like putting it onto the client in a different way. And then also when possible, use creative or familiar interventions. So one example is that when men communicate to each other, they have this, this is kind of a pop psych thing, but it's shoulder, you know, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, this way instead of this way.
Kind of emoting. Guys, this is a blanketed statement, definitely some pop psychology in here, no validated research for you, but there's conversations about how guys tend to sit next to each other, walk next to each other, be doing an activity. This is helpful for anyone who is not coming from a culture where naming, thinking, processing emotions is not comfortable or normative. And it can be a really advantageous starting place. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't offer and use the power of being one-on-one and using eye contact with concave shoulder positioning where you are demonstrating connection and empathy. But starting in different places might be more familiar, might be more comfortable, might help you to build trust and rapport quicker.
And that can be said for anyone with a history of trauma, that
Exactly.
may not be comfortable, you know. So I think what so let's use our tools. What I'm hearing you say is that being flexible in your interventions is important.
Yep, being flexible and thinking about what might this scenario feel like for someone who's never been in it, for you know, how might some of these activities feel infantile? You know, having a 45-year-old male identified client or having a hardened 12-year-old client who has gang affiliation, if you hand them a box of toys and for a fidget item, they might see that as some sort of insult. Also, making sure that those toys are available so that they can have access, that they can be vulnerable, talking about it. Well, you might not want this box of toys, but some people find it entertaining. Some people find it comforting. And so they're there if you would ever want it, you know.
Just being authentic with it, like you said, you know what I mean? You can both laugh and joke about it. You can name it to get through the awkwardness. That's the technique that I feel like will break those barriers, you know?
It does.
Because you can see through it when someone's awkwardly trying to maybe navigate a situation that they're not comfortable with, and then it's putting the client in an awkward place too. Like just
But when you say
it
becomes funny.
Yes, it becomes funny, and it usually disperses some of that, and you create a point of connection that builds up your trust going forward.
Yep.
And then just to bring it back to that first point of being authentic, and you said that people who have experienced trauma can read people. I mean, that is the essence of polyvagal theory, right? You know, that trauma is stored in the body, and that people, when they have experienced trauma, they become, I think of it like the Terminator, like when the Terminator's scanning, looking for that one person that they're trying to assassinate. but instead it's actually you are scanning constantly looking for signs of safety and signs of danger, right? And so even just a big smile and eye contact, that can do so much just to calm people's tension because it is recognized in people's bodies in ways that they are not necessarily even aware. And that is the biology of trauma, right? And so being authentic, people who have experienced trauma, they're not necessarily going out and being like, I'm going to find someone who's authentic. They are recognizing it subconsciously.
Yeah, and there is research on
Yes, that is a real
individuals,
thing.
especially individuals with higher ACE scores,
Yes.
that they have incredible ability to read microexpressions. And if you
Yes.
think about it, think about how you might, with a close partner or a family member, you might know how they're feeling based on their footsteps or based on their breathing. You also have this ability. It might not just be as broad. So gonna try and make it through the next two parts a little bit more quickly. And let's listen to Aisha's story. Again, Aisha is actually a client that I had in DC. So I'm gonna play this, and as you watch for it, watch for vulnerabilities and for indicators that this might be a trafficking experience.
Aisha is 15 years old and has been part of a local gang for 3 months. At first, everything was great. Aisha felt safe with her boyfriend, who is a gang leader and a part of a powerful community. Lately, things have been changing. She and her boyfriend spend more time with girls who must have sex for money. Aisha helps by collecting money and running errands for the girls. Aisha's boyfriend asks Aisha to start recruiting new girls from her middle school to prove her love for him. When Aisha declines, her boyfriend becomes violent. He pushes her against the bed and calls her dumb and useless. He says that if she doesn't find new girls, she'll be the one working, or he'll tell her family that she's been pimping out girls, which is illegal.
All right, so what vulnerabilities were present in Aisha's story? Family struggling with money, need for community and protection. Also, as though we know that community and belonging is incredibly, incredibly important for adolescents, it is across cultures one of the biggest indicators of vulnerability to suicidality that we know of. So some of those things based on one theory is acquired capability, an individual's ability to experience harm. So if they have a history of abuse, access to whatever mechanism to complete a suicide, and thwarted belonging, not feeling like they have community or feeling like a burden. Okay, so Aisha had family struggling with money, need for community and protection. She loves her boyfriend. He matters a lot to her. She feels love from her boyfriend. Fear and shame, pressure from the boyfriend, threats of telling. So we got coercion, need to feel useful. Absolutely. I love that. and capable, probably. Her responsibility to be faithful and to provide to her family versus shame, criminalization of sex work, which relates to policing and fearfulness of telling anybody, of being arrested. This individual is in real life also, though I've seen this case multiple times, unfortunately, with very, very young girls, as well as with 30-year-old women. This individual was a child from a large family, a large immigrant family. She was Muslim, as is identified in the story, I suppose. And she just didn't feel like she belonged anywhere. Her parents were very busy. Her dad worked constantly. Her mom worked tirelessly to take care of all the kids, and she didn't feel like she had a place in any of it. So another thing I want to talk about is what barriers to exit did you see? Also, in real life, unfortunately, Aisha was pregnant by the trafficker, who was, I think, 6 years older than her. So there's this organization that used to be in DC. It was Mama Somethings. It was a like pregnancy doula service. They were amazing. They were fantastic, very trauma informed, very relevant. Barriers to exit: fear of violence, past history of violence. She committed a crime as per current law. Immigrant fear related to that. There is also still this economic need for her family. As far as, I'm just pulling this up on my phone too, because I can't see my speaker notes. So as far as vulnerabilities, I also wanted to bring up her age, that she's young. She also doesn't know what healthy relationships look like. She doesn't know what human trafficking is or what forced criminality is. There's a normalization of gang involvement in her community. It's very common. It's a very common mechanism to power and prestige. And other barriers, you've all said threats, that she's done something, being exposed to her family, coming from a conservative Muslim family. She probably has more fear of her parents than she does the police. She's also 12, so she definitely has more fear of her parents than the police. Not knowing or understanding protections or resources, absolutely. Thank you for that. Lesser developed prefrontal cortex, absolutely.
That was
Thank
me.
you for
I just
that.
did that to make everybody laugh.
Yeah, so she has the fear of violence, stigma, judgment from her family and community, limited awareness of resources and legal protections, fear of loss of financial and social stability provided by the gang. And it's also very likely that the outreach in her area, that the providers in her area aren't trying to connect to her, that they don't see her, and that even if she went to them, that they would not see her.
Or that they
Which,
would, if it's, if, you know, I hate to say it, if the people that she is recruiting, and then she's going to get charged with trafficking of minors.
yep.
And the
Yeah.
feds are going to take the case.
She would
Yep.
be taken out of that sphere of victimization and put into sphere of perpetrator.
Yeah,
Yep,
like
absolutely.
for sure.
So that is the end of the presentation. We Yeah, I decided to just go with it all. I loved all our conversations. Hopefully people benefited from that as well, but here's a satisfaction survey. I'll take this link and put it into the chat as well. But a framework crafts every single presentation based on our satisfaction surveys. So please let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what worked, what didn't work.
It really, we can't thank you enough. The one philosophical question that I want to ask you, and you may not have a answer to it. The only thing that scares me about this conversation about forced criminality and specific to gangs is I worry about this taking off as the next war on drugs.
Yes, absolutely.
And I worry about law enforcement taking this and running. And so, yes, we now recognize that the war on drugs was a failure and that it was motivated by racial animus in many ways. And we can, but now we can just classify everyone as a trafficker when in fact, these young men merely were lucky enough to survive it.
Yep. And I do think that
And I'm not denying that there's victimization. You know, I'm not denying any of this. I am worried philosophically.
Yeah.
About
and
what
I do think that that's a risk. And that there is, you know, like I talked about those parents in New York forcing their two sons to traffic women in their area. You know, it is a really sticky situation. Like and when we're thinking of opportunity and where choice and power come from, no one's choosing these things. Like even if someone isn't forcing them, it's very likely that people would have chosen something else. But then there's this very, very common element of intergenerational trafficking,
Yeah.
of intergenerational crime rings, etc. So
yeah, there's just so many. I mean, I watch it. There's so many similarities between the war on drugs and the quote unquote war on trafficking. And I just worry. I'm more specifically with the use of, and I believe that it meets. I mean, that clip with James Dold and Evelyn, and I agree. So it's not that I disagree. I agree. I worry about the unintended consequences of that framing. That's all. I feel like I have to put it out there because I'll regret it if I don't say it in the future.
yeah, definitely.
Well, I hope we can continue to bring like the learnings we had today into the discussions that we're having here in Maryland, and of course nationally. You know, we're Charlie, we're going to be I know our labor trafficking subcommittee from our statewide task force is going to be presenting some research and findings in the next couple of weeks, and I hope everyone that was able to join us today is going to be able to bring some of the learnings that we had here, and again being able to have this more nuanced perspective and understand that people may be occupying multiple places as they're, you know, potentially being pushed into a situation of forced criminality, right? And that we can't just see things in this black and white way. We have to figure out how to unpack this both as service providers and also unpack this in how our laws are treating individuals as we go forward here in Maryland. So thank you so much for being here for such an excellent presentation. Thanks to everyone that stuck it out here with us. If you'd like to share this with colleagues, if you missed a chunk of the presentation, we will have it up on our website shortly, as well as sharing out the slides. And you can find all of our resources from our past, oh my gosh, it's been over 6 years now of
It's
webinars
longer.
that we've been doing as a partnership, available at MVLS's website, mvlslaw.org/HT, also at htprevention.org. Our full resource library is up on both of those sites. You can also always reach out to Jess or myself if you'd like to get some information. We generally, as many of you know, try to distill some of the most important learnings from these discussions into a tip sheet that can help guide some of the discussions that you're having at your organization and as you're engaging in your specific practice area. So you can look for that too, which will be coming to our website. So thank you so much. And
Charlie, thank you.
yeah, hope everyone, thank you, Charlie. Great.
Thank you.
Great discussion. And I hope everyone here in Maryland enjoys this beautiful sunny day. And we look forward to seeing you next quarter for the next iteration of this.
Happy spring.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.